Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started for the ag industry stakeholder meeting. I've been looking forward to this. There's going to be a lot of good information today. I was driving in this morning and thinking a little bit, and not to freak anybody out, but we're entering the third calendar year of COVID. Let that sink in for a minute. So who would have thought we would be in this situation in 2021? And despite all the challenges of COVID through 2020, you guys, the ag and forestry communities and industries have been able to provide a safe and abundant and affordable food and fiber supply to the masses, and to be congratulated for that. I think it's been an example of the fortitude and the stick-to-itiveness of all of you, and it's a good thing. And I think y'all lead an example of how things should be done. Also, I was driving in this morning. I've got a Sirius satellite radio on my vehicle, and I've listened to 70s and 80s channel, and lo and behold, the sun's shining this morning driving in, and John Denver, one of John Denver's songs, 1974, came on there. Maybe Stan Butt may be the only oldest. He may be the only one old enough to remember back then. Keeps shaking his head, but it was Sunshine on My Shoulder. You remember that song? Makes me happy. If I could sing you a song. So I encourage you to look up those lyrics. So I'm encouraged for 2021. I think it's going to be better than 2020. We're going to be pulling out of this thing and stronger and better than ever, and hopefully profitable as well. I see we've got not one, but two cowboy hats today. I don't know what that means. Is that going to be a requirement from now on? That, yeah, you got to wear a cowboy hat not a bad thing. So I think first up, we're going to have to shuffle the schedule a little bit. Dr. Field is briefing the governor, and so she's going to be tied up till after 9:30, which is not going to be a problem. We'll just move around. So we've got Zach first up. Zach, lay it on us.
Good to see you, Commissioner. Happy Thursday. Good to be with everyone. I'll be brief. I know a lot of things are going on as we're getting ready to start the 117th Congress. I just want to take the opportunity to kind of review what was included in the omnibus stimulus package that got passed. A lot of those programs that you saw there are starting to trickle out, but are going to be primarily handled by the new administration. Some of the things that were included in that stimulus package was $100 million for the specialty crop block grant, which I know is really critical for the Department of Ag programs around the country. Another $100 million for the local ag market program. There was specifically $28 million carved out just for a block grant for the state departments of agriculture. There were $60 million included for increased meat processing capacity. There was $10 million for NEFA food safety, and there was $10 million for a farm and ranch stress assistance program. Those were the big ticket items. We're still waiting on some details on some of those different programs from the administration. Like I said, I think we're at the kind of the point now where we're going to be looking for the next administration to really implement a lot of the programs, though some of the stuff is starting to trickle out. Just another friendly reminder for you state staff, we welcome you to come to the Winter Policy Conference. It's going to be virtual this year. It'll be February 22nd to 25th. Free registration. It's not up on the website yet, but the agenda is we're going to have some really fantastic speakers, and we're going to be talking about a lot of really cool issues. That's kind of my brief update. Happy to answer any questions, Commissioner, or however else I can be of assistance to you.
Well, just maybe one comment and question. So, I think the ag industry was kind of a little bit apprehensive on who Biden might select as secretary, and lo and behold, I think everybody's pretty happy with Vilsack returning in that role. Can you talk about that, and what expectations, or what's the mood and the feel of the ag communities about that?
Sure. I think it's always good to have a agency leader who knows where the bathroom is. It's always good to have someone who's been in the building and will know how to get to work from the first day. Obviously, he has tremendous relationships with the industry. He's been the CEO of the Dairy Export Council the last 4 years, so he's still been plugged into the conversations that a lot of us are dealing with. And I think so. Yes, I think it's everybody's very optimistic of a good start. I think one of the telling signs that is good to see is that you're hearing Congressman Scott, who's going to be the House Ag Committee chairman, and then Congressman G.T. Thompson, who's going to be the ranking member from Pennsylvania, and Secretary-elect Vilsack, all talking about how climate's going to be a critical part of the next administration and Congress. So it's nice when you see the three main policy area leaders talking about the same issues, and I think that's a good thing. So everybody's kind of on the same page there. I think the next part of this is just to see who the next group of deputies, undersecretaries, and other USDA leadership is going to be, and what kind of relationships we'll have with them.
And would you expect dramatic changes in anything, policy, influence of the Green New Deal, or anything like that?
At USDA, I mean, obviously, I think it's a reasonable, not a guaranteed, but it's a reasonable assumption that it's going to function similarly to when Secretary Vilsack was there before. I think it's a reasonable expectation. I think the big question mark, Commissioner, is what EPA is going to be like. I think that's the agency that we're all kind of just curious to see how that agency is going to interact. They selected Mike Reagan from North Carolina Department of Environmental Protection, so it's good to see a state agency lead come. It's good whenever you can get people who share a role like you do, who know what it's like to serve and whatnot. But we don't know what that agency is going to be like going into the next administration. So I think that's kind of the big question mark that we're all looking at.
And how long will it take for him to get all the undersecretaries in place and all that?
Vilsack, I would imagine, will operate pretty quickly because he knows the system. And honestly, Commissioner, I'm not sure. I would assume that Secretary Vilsack will be confirmed pretty quickly in comparison to some of his peers. I don't know that to be the case for Secretary like Reagan. This will be his first time going through the confirmation process. So I would imagine that would be a slightly longer process for him. Not necessarily. Again, it may not be contentious and it may not be long, but I would imagine it will at least be slightly longer than Vilsack, who's already gone through the process before.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Zach before we move to the next? Okay, I'm not seeing any there. We appreciate the update. I assume as the months go by, you'll have more and more meat to give us.
Yeah, I think this is just one of those interesting times where we're coming to an end of one era, going into a new era, and you're just kind of waiting to see. I'm hoping the February update we'll have some priorities to tell you what we're hearing from the next administration and what's been moving on the Hill with everything happening. But again, please, please, if you have the time, step into the Winter Policy Conference. And Commissioner, happy to always help you and your team. If anybody has any questions, the Commissioner's team has my contact information. Always happy to be a resource for all of you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Zach. We're going to move on to Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network update. And Grace, I believe you're filling in and going to give that update. Are you on? Grace? Okay, that's okay. No problem. So Keith, we're gonna flip it to you.
Can you hear me okay, Commissioner?
Yes, wall to wall.
All right, while I'm getting ready, Dr. Hatcher runs this place. He's Commissioner of Agriculture, but really the one that actually runs it is Tina Rogers. And for Tina, before we get going this morning, it's just a lot easier. Just go on and say, roll tide and head on down the road. So Tina, this is for you, roll tide, and congratulations. Just leave it at that. All right. The real
Keith,
reason.
you don't even have to bring that up, Keith.
Well, Dr. Hatcher, it's just easier that way. I know I'm in trouble with you, but I'm going to keep Tina happy.
You know your day by day anyhow, so it just reinforces that.
I'll take my chances with Tina.
Okay.
Start out
SEC too.
SEC, that's right. Start out with a little information from David Arnold, our state forester. The forestry community is focused and very eager to continue to work our forestry workforce development programs that we have. Got some big plans and very excited to develop this program in support of Tennessee's forestry industry. We have several partners that he's working with, including TDA's policy and legislation, of course, the Division of Forestry and the Tennessee Forestry Association. And we plan to engage in the department's regional outreach coordinators and work with them more in distressed counties. And we want to meet with distressed counties to better understand their needs and to bring jobs and economic activity to them through workforce development programs. So we just want you guys to be aware of that. And from David Arnold. Now, my favorite subject, of course, is always the Coronavirus Agriculture and Forestry Business Fund. And as a reminder, these funds were to be used within the following categories. These are the CARES dollars, either in business disruption, costs associated with the pandemic response, supply chain enhancement, or increased meat processing capacity. And in making these allocations that we did to the businesses across the state, we put over 50% of them in small businesses with sales under than $500,000 and put less than 5% of these resources into businesses that were larger, over $20 million. Examples of organizations that have already received these funds include Amazing Acres out of Sparta, Tennessee, Bledsoe County Fair out of Pikeville, Elk Valley Hardwood out of Etheridge, Fayette Packing Company out of Eads, Highland Manor Winery out of Jamestown, Ottinger Dairy out of Parrotsville, Stanfield Hardwood Lumber out of Culleoka, Tennessee Grass Fed out of Clarksville, Wampler's Farm Sausage out of Lenore City, and Woodall Grain out of Deckard. And the amounts that these organizations have received has mounted from a few $100s all the way up to our maximum of $250,000 based on the needs of the applying organizations and the maximum, of course, that we have. And to date, I'm very happy to report that we've dispersed over $17.4 million of the $55 million allocated in this program by Governor Lee. That's around 30% of the total. We're working extremely hard to get the remaining 70% out into Tennessee's agriculture and forestry industry. And if you hear of any organizations that have been approved that are having any difficulties, encourage them to contact their local that we have there here at the department, our TDA business consultants, or if they want to contact me directly. We're finding, working with the consulting firm that's been assisting us in this project, Horn, the accounting firm, that they're very willing to have individual consultations with these organizations to clear up any confusion that would help them get through the rest of the funding process as we process their requests. As an example, just last week, we had one of these consultations with a larger organization that's actually on this conference call this morning. And in 10 minutes, we were able to clear up everything for them in order to get their $250,000 allocation. And we even had Dr. Hatcher a little time to cry about the state of UT's football before the call ended. But that's my report, Commissioner Hatcher. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody's support of this fund. And we're more than glad to answer any questions. And if anybody has any issues they want to talk with me about online, I am more than glad to do it.
Thank you, Keith. Let's see. Dr. Smith, you are up next, sir.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Let me just share my screen here. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, yes, you're good.
Perfect. All right, well, I want to give a quick update on where we are. There's been actually a fair amount that's changed since we last ended up meeting. I thought kind of maybe a good place to start today would end up being looking at what happened kind of in 2020. So what I looked at was I looked at several markets, the changes that we've seen in terms of nearby prices from December 31st, 2019 to 2020. And you can see, we're obviously ending a high note on the row crop side of things. A lot of our cattle markets are flat to down. But the really important thing that I wanted to kind of point out here is if you look at the price ranges that we traded in 2020, it was actually astronomical. And I'll use soybeans to kind of highlight this. If you look at prices during the 2020 calendar year for soybeans between 808 and 1321, that is a tremendous price range. When we think of back, when we've seen those coronavirus-induced lows and the highs that we've ended on the row crop side of things, and we've seen that across pretty much all markets. So again, I'm not saying that 2021 is going to see the same volatility or trading ranges across some of our key commodities, but it's important to know that even though right now, particularly on the row crop side of things are looking good, we will still have a range of prices that we will end up facing in 2020. So there's a quote out there, markets, they can be good, they can be bad, or they can be ugly, but it will most likely be all at the same time. So again, it's important to kind of consider as we progress through this year, we're probably going to see some continued volatility. We'll talk a little bit about price direction and kind of what's been going on that's been influencing our prices. And so when we look at what our profitability pictures look like, it is important to kind of look at what the CFAP program has contributed to the state. I don't want to take Commissioner Mayfield's thunder, but their team did a fantastic job in administrating the first two rounds of CFAP. And with CFAP 3 coming, that will continue to provide some support to producers. I wouldn't expect, particularly the wide-ranging programs moving forward. I think we'll see maybe some more targeted funds for those that aren't experiencing the same recovery as, say, some of the row crop side of things in terms of prices expected. When we look at distribution of these payments, there's kind of 4 different things I want to show. This highlights on the row crop side of things, and then total payments. You can see the amount of payments that went out spatially for our 3 primary row crops, and then the total payments, which includes absolutely everything on a county-by-county basis. So there wasn't a single county in Tennessee that did not receive some type of CFAP 1 compensation. I suspect that will be the same for CFAP 2 when we look at the data. You will obviously see, tight ties to certain counties for different commodities and the support that was received. One thing that is beneficial about the first CFAP payments was since it was based on inventory that was held in storage. So we have to think all the way back to January 15th when these payments were targeted for inventory held at that period of time. We can look at how our commodities were stored on the row crop side of things at that point in time. So it's a powerful resource that we can end up looking at kind of what our marketing behavior was in 2020. So as I mentioned, prices have really taken off on the row crop side of things. Lots of optimism, really strong prices. When we look at wheat and cotton, spot prices above 80 cents for cotton. If you would have told me that back in September, I wouldn't have believed it. But here we are, you have cash wheat prices at $6.50. And what's really remarkable is if you think back even to just December 1st, and you have to remember this rally started way back in August for most row crops, and it's just continued to end up going up. Even from December 1st, we've seen a 12% increase in wheat and a 13% increase in cotton. And when we look at soybeans and corn, it's even more dramatic. We had a $1.22 for corn and $2.66 cent per bushel or $2.66 increase for soybeans. So 23 and 28% for those two commodities. Where right now we've got spot prices for soybeans up over $14 and corn up at $5.52 in terms of Tennessee cash prices. So some really good price news on the commodity side of things. One thing that you do have to take with some of these price increases with a little bit of a grain of salt is that, most of the old crop, will have some degree of pricing. There will be some out there. So again, these nearby rallies aren't nearly as important as what we're looking at in terms of potential 2021 crop pricing opportunities, which are still very good. So again, there's a lot of optimism in 2021 when we look at row crops. When we're looking at kind of reasonable price expectations, getting some pricing on that new crop, I think is really important. We can see tremendous trading ranges over the course of a full year. So when we see these opportunities, making sure that we price at least some of our estimated 2021 production. You don't want to sell your way out of a rally, but again, it's really important to end up taking advantage, because if we're not doing some of the pricing things, then we're maybe not securing beneficial rallies. So again, when we look at current prices for 2021, we have soybeans favoring corn and corn over cotton. And again, what we've seen all of them rise, but again, we'll have to wait and see how the remainder of the spring ends up occurring. When we look at livestock markets, we haven't seen that same dramatic price increase, but we should see some stability in the market with maybe the opportunity to have some moderate price increases. The one caution on the livestock side of things is that we are looking at an increased feed cost environment in 2021. Some of the initial estimates that we've been working with is anywhere between 12 and 16% increase in the cost of feed. That could be higher depending on how this rally in the crop prices go. And then it also is obviously very important what happens in terms of weather conditions for our pasture and forage. Hogs, again, we've seen a kind of a sideways move over the last couple of months, kind of tightly between the 61 and 71 cents on the nearby lean hog futures. Again, we do expect the increased feed cost to have ramifications in the hog industry. And the big question on the export side thing, I'll leave it to Dr. Mohammed, is how much will China buy? They started off really hot in 2020 and then kind of slowed down a little bit at the end of 2021 and focused more on importing grains. We'll have to see how that works in terms of which commodity categories China's looking at and how close they get to being able to fulfill that phase one trade targets. When we look at kind of general economic data, we have seen some continued improvements in terms of employment. The latest number for Tennessee for unemployment rate is 5.3, which was down from 7.4 the previous month. And we've seen that same trend in the U.S. numbers as well. Although, again, we still always have to point out, when we're looking at where we are right now relative to last year before the coronavirus really took its impact on the economy, we still got about twice as many people on unemployment, and we've got about 3 times as many that are being added. And so again, we're kind of middle of the pack in Tennessee. We rank 20th right now in the nation for unemployment rate. Ethanol production is one that I think is going to be so important when we look at what happens in 2021. Obviously, we have the small refinery waivers exemptions that's on the table, but the Biden administration will have the ability to really dictate kind of any changes in the RFS policy, and that will obviously have some ramifications for ethanol. Right now, we're still running about 100,000 barrels per day below pre-COVID-19 levels, and we've seen a build in stock, so that does create some concerns for the ethanol industry. With how hot the corn market has been, that is another factor that's going to be challenging for that industry. Kind of close up just a general slide on purchasing behavior for consumers for the food that they eat. So again, we've got the food service and drinking establishments and the grocery stores on the right-hand side. One thing that we did see that was a little bit different in November, we actually seen an uptick again in the grocery store purchases and a downtick in the restaurant business. And a lot of that stems to some of the lockdowns that we've seen in other parts of the country. But it is important to kind of look at these trends, because as we came through last summer, we started seeing, grocery store sales go down and restaurants go up. But again, in November, we've seen that month over month change in a different direction. So again, we'll have to see how that continues for the final month of 2020 and as we progress into 2021. So with that, Mr. Commissioner, that's all I had today. I'd be happy to answer any questions in the chat, or if not, I will turn it back over to you and we'll distribute these slides.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Smith. And I see that Dr. Phil is on, the rock star of the health department. And brace yourself, Dr. Phil, for a bunch of questions. So, and
Fair.
it may be a little tough skin. We'll see what happens here.
I'm okay. I appreciate the kind words, Commissioner. Let me start my slideshow here and get my screen shared. Great. Can you see that okay?
Yes. That's that
Perfect.
same kind of bright red thing. We're tired of looking at that one.
Well, I'll go to the next one. How's that?
I'm just messing with it.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Just want to provide an update on our data trends across the state per usual, and then, of course, touch some on vaccine distribution and where we are in that whole process and some updates there. So if we start by looking at our symptom-based data, our more non-specific emergency department data, what I'll really point out that's notable here is that we are really seeing no influenza this year. If you compare to January, February of last year, you can see, roughly 10% of folks in emergency departments met this criteria. We're sort of at our baseline, very low level, less than 3% of folks presenting with influenza-like illness. Not surprising because of all of the mitigation measures in place. Flu has really just not had the ability to take hold and spread throughout the population, which is a good thing. We do still see fairly high levels of COVID-like illness, and that mirrors our case trends, although I think we're at least seeing some plateau there, which is reassuring. So when we look at our cases, this is by week. What I'll really highlight is that fortunately, we're not continuing to see an exponential increase in cases over time. We've really seen cases plateau here over the last 4 to 6 weeks. This decline here on week 52, I think is a bit of an aberration, largely related to the Christmas holidays. I think many fewer people sought testing that week. So I think that artificially lowered our case counts, but you can see we're now averaging fairly regularly between 40 and 45,000 new cases a week. So roughly, 6,000 plus cases a day on average. While we're not declining precipitously, I do think it's reassuring that we've at least plateaued here. When we look at our volume of testing, we see that we're still averaging around 30,000 cases, or rather tests conducted per day. We're rapidly approaching 6 million PCR tests that have been completed, and continue to see very high levels of testing across the state, and have rebounded a bit from the dip that we saw over the holidays. Our percent positivity remains high. We have seen a bit of a downtrend here, which is reassuring, but we're still at about 18% positivity over the last week, which is obviously much higher than we want to be as compared to our 10% threshold and really our goal of 5% or less. I will just mention, we have 2 types of tests, both PCR and then the antigen tests that are the more rapid on-site point of care tests. And we're still seeing a fairly high level of antigen testing. This is done in many healthcare systems or some correctional facilities and other types of locations across the state, but over 70,000 antigen tests being reported to us per week, and about 10% of those are positive. Unfortunately, we've crossed the threshold of over 8,000 deaths that have now been reported. Our case fatality rate is fairly stable at about 1.2%. But I think, unfortunately, with our volume of cases continuing to be as high as it is, even with the plateau, if we're averaging 6,000 cases a day, and at least 1.2% of those will pass away, that means an average of about 70 plus deaths a day, which is just really substantial for our families and communities and our state. The other good news that we have is that we see a similar plateau in our hospitalizations. This very rapid increase has leveled off. Again, it's not precipitously declining, but it's at least stable. COVID patients still represent about 30% of all hospitalized patients in the state, with right around 3,000 patients hospitalized. So I have to show this, as I do every time, and just remind people that although vaccine is here and it's being distributed, and that's really exciting, it's going to be a while before we see the widespread effects of vaccination in our communities. And so we have to continue to abide by these prevention measures. I will say, and I don't say this to spark alarm or fear, but many of you may have seen in the news information about some new variants of COVID-19, which appear to be more transmissible. They're not in and of themselves more dangerous or more virulent, but they do seem to spread easier from person to person. And there's much thought that the rapid increase in cases that they're seeing in the United Kingdom and in Ireland and some other places in the world is related to the presence of this new variant, which we know is present in the United States. So I think it just reiterates the need to be prudent and cautious and principled with regards to all of these measures that we all know by heart by now and are, I know, incredibly tired of thinking about and abiding by, but we need to hang in there a little bit longer to try to continue to protect each other and our communities with many of these prevention measures outlined here. So shifting to talk about vaccine, I just want to reiterate where you can find a lot of resources on our websites. I'll cut straight to the chase. So we've updated this vaccine allocation diagram a bit. Obviously, not a lot of change here to the 1A1 and 1A2 populations, which are really focused on the very most vulnerable, including residents and staff of long-term care facilities, and then those at greatest risk, those in all of our healthcare communities and healthcare workers who are, and first responders who are potentially interacting with COVID patients on a daily basis. We have now adjusted phase 1B to be school and childcare staff, and then administrators in first responder organizations. This phase 1C is those over the age of 16 with high risk comorbidities. And then 2A and B are those in our critical infrastructure designation. And in the agriculture sector, that's commercial agriculture workers, involved in food processing and commodities production. And then phase 3 is our congregate living, grocery workers, corrections residents, and phase 4 is really all others. Simultaneously, we've developed this age-based criteria, and I know it's a bit confusing to have kind of two different phases at the same time, but the goal was really to ensure that that those that are oldest in our populations, regardless of their occupation or their living situation, that they have access to vaccine fairly quickly. You know, we see that the vast majority of our hospitalizations and deaths are in those over the age of 65. That gets more and more marked the older that you get, and so that's why we've added this additional piece to ensure that those folks, even if they're retired and at home, have access to vaccine, largely because they're the ones that are contributing to the massive burden of hospitalizations and strain on our healthcare system right now. I will also say that, you know, these other designations were not made in a vacuum. You know, and they're not, there are ongoing discussions and looks at this plan. Obviously, this was discussed with our large stakeholder group with over 30 different organizations that are represented there, and then of course discussed, I'll say beyond extensively, exhaustively with Governor Lee and the Unified Command Group team. And so, you know, I just want to reiterate that these decisions are not made lightly. They weigh heavily on all of us. We recognize that there are many people that want to get vaccinated as soon as they can, and the thought of restricting vaccine from those people is not anything that we want to do, but we are trying to be very thoughtful and intentional in how we approach this rollout. And so, you know, speaking more about the critical infrastructure designation, you know, this is a bit more restrictive for vaccine allocation than you might see in the CISA guidelines or in the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and that's largely just due to our continued, you know, somewhat restricted amount of vaccine that's available. We don't have a free-flowing pipeline of as much vaccine as we want right now. There's obviously a lot of discussions at the national level from the outgoing administration and the incoming administration about how there might be changes to the vaccine that's being distributed to the states. But right now, none of that has been translated into a hard and fast number that we can take action on. You know, our goal is obviously to move through these phases as quickly as possible, but until we know that we have the supply to do so and move on, we just aren't able to do that. So, you know, these decisions were made really balancing, as I said, the groups that have the greatest morbidity and mortality from COVID, but also using our own data to look at areas where we see workers at greatest risk from outbreaks in their workplaces and occupations, and where we've seen them be put at increased risk because of whatever aspect of the workplace. So I'll sort of stop there. I'm happy to take questions on this further after I finish, but I just wanted to provide that sort of high-level overview and update about these designations and the simultaneous age-based criteria. So as a reminder,
go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, so as a reminder, you know, this is a process. So we're still in this phase where limited doses of vaccine are available. And that's part of why, you know, we're being so intentional as to which groups are eligible and have access to vaccine. I think there's the hope that in the next couple of months, we're going to move into more this middle phase where we have much larger doses available and more broad administration will be possible. So in Tennessee, and this is a fairly horrible map from CDC, so I apologize for that. They need to change their breakpoints so that it's not just a country of dark blue states, but we provided that feedback. You know, I think in Tennessee, we're fortunate that we've really been a leader in vaccine administration. So this is as of January 11th, we had 385,000 roughly doses delivered within the state. And about 70% of those had been administered. There are some states where they've only distributed or administered 15% of their vaccine doses. And there's a lot that's contributing to that, but I think we've been very good at balancing getting vaccine to hospitals and health departments and getting them into arms quickly. So we don't have thousands and thousands of doses sitting in a health department or in a hospital that aren't being given to someone. And we've been really proud of that effort. And then I will just note that about 100,000 of our doses not included in this 385 have been allocated at the federal level to vaccinations in long-term care facilities. So just another note that that's taking a big chunk of our overall allocation to the state to ensure that that group is fully vaccinated. We do have a dashboard on our website that is updated twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays with the total number of vaccines reported. You can see the breakdown by number of people that have received 1 versus 2 doses, a breakdown of age and race and ethnicity and state, county of residence. And what I'll highlight here is that over 28% of our vaccines that have been administered are in people over the age of 71, which is really what we're hoping for. We see benefit even after the first dose of vaccine in that population at protecting them from hospitalization and certainly from death. And so, you know, the goal is really to get as many of those people as possible and protect them from adverse outcomes. I want to highlight some tools that exist that have been developed and I think may be helpful. The first is it's determine your COVID phase. You can enter information about your particular occupation and age and the county that you live in, and then you can enter your email address and phone number, and you'll receive a text message or an email when your phase is open in the county that you reside in. So a way just to be sure that you're on top of those phases as we move through them across the state. Similarly, there's a map that shows the phases that each county is in. You can see that, most of our counties are still in 1A1 and 1A2. There are some pockets in more rural parts of the state, West Tennessee, the Cumberland Plateau, and upper Northeast, where populations are very low. So these are some of our smallest counties where they've already been able to move to phase 1B. We expect that different counties will move through the phases at different times. That's expected. And in some ways, it's a goal. We've identified about 30 counties in the state that are most distressed or most vulnerable based on a variety of factors, where we know that people there, if they get COVID, they have a much higher risk of hospitalization or death. And so we're prioritizing, to a small degree, vaccine in those counties. And it's expected that in some of those more rural areas that they may move through their phases a bit faster. And then I already showed you, alluded to the dashboard that exists and data from CDC rather, but there are lots of opportunities to track vaccine progress across the state and across the country. There's commiserate with case and testing data. There's a million independent websites and news organizations that are tracking this as well. But overall, I think we're pleased with how things have gone in Tennessee. But this is not a static process. There's ongoing planning as we speak about sort of the next steps and where we look to the future to ensure that, again, we have as little vaccine as possible that's in the state that's not been given to someone, which is ultimately the goal at the end of the day. So there's a lot of resources, and I'll share these slides with Tina for her to distribute. But lots of frequently asked questions, documents, and others that are updated on a weekly basis. So, please, look at these resources and use them. And I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have, which I think I saw a few in the chat box.
Yeah, go ahead. There's like 3 there or so.
Great. Yeah, so it looks like the first question is, how is the virus variant affecting those that have already tested positive for the original COVID-19? Yeah, so right now it doesn't look like any of these variants have immune escape. So meaning that they're not different enough that your immune system shouldn't still recognize it if you were previously immune. And that's true whether you had natural infection or whether or not you received the vaccine. So that's good news. But because they are more transmissible, that means that say that 1% of all cases of COVID die if we see 500 instead of 100 people infected with this new variant versus the original variant. That's a potentially multifold increase in the number of cases and deaths and hospitalizations that we could see, which is why we care about it so much. A question, will people who've tested positive for COVID-19 and recovered be vaccinated? Yeah, so we recommend, discussing with your doctor. We assume that most people infected with COVID have immunity for at least 3 months. So we encourage people to consider waiting a few months before getting vaccinated. It's not required, however. At a minimum, you need to wait until your acute illness has improved. So outside of your isolation period, not having any additional symptoms. And there's some evidence that waiting a little bit longer, at least 6 weeks or so, might be wise. But there's no hard and fast rule or sort of requirement around that. Any idea when Shelby or Davidson might progress and reach 1C phase? I don't know when they'll progress, but I can tell you that they're moving as quickly as they can, and we expect that they will certainly progress through the phases. Perhaps a little bit behind others, but not too markedly behind the rest of the state. There's a comment that one of my links doesn't work, so I'll take a look at everything before I send the slides out and make sure that those are all still good. The questions, if you've had COVID-19 and recovered, can you still transmit to others if you come into contact with it again? Yeah, so there doesn't right now seem to be a sort of carrier state for COVID, meaning that well, it's a little confusing because we know that about 30 to 50% of people with COVID that are infected are asymptomatic, and they're capable of transmitting to other people. For people, regardless of whether they were symptomatic or not, if they have antibodies and immune response to COVID, if they're exposed again, they should not get reinfected to the degree that they're capable of transmitting to other people. So that's what I mean by there not really being a carrier state for people that have immunity. Now, that being said, it's not impossible for people to be reinfected again if their immune system has forgotten the virus, so to speak. and doesn't mount the same type of response that's needed to prevent them from being reinfected. And so in that case, it is possible for you to retransmit to other people. The next question is, what is the length of time the vaccine provides protection? That's a great question, and one that we don't have an answer to right now. I think the assumption is that probably it will provide at least 3 to 6 months of protection, as that's common with coronaviruses, whether you are infected naturally or whether your body sees it through a vaccine for the first time. But all of the clinical trials for these vaccines are still ongoing, and that's part of the ongoing study, is to determine how long that protection lasts. I think many of us are hopeful that it will be at least a year, and it could be even longer, but we just don't have the data yet to know that. Someone asked that I repeat the asymptomatic statement. Yeah, so we know that about 30 to 50%, it varies depending on the study you look at, of people infected with COVID have no symptoms, but they're capable of transmitting it to other people. And that's part of why all of those prevention measures, social distancing, wearing a face covering, are so important, because you could be infected and not know it and be putting other people at risk. But regardless of whether you have symptoms or not, the risk of you becoming reinfected again in the future after you had COVID and transmitting to other people is low. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. Looks like those are all the questions in the chat box right now. Commissioner Hatcher, did you have other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple quick ones. So we were fortunate enough to have Commissioner Piercy yesterday at the Economic Recovery Group meeting, commissioners meeting, and we had a little discussion there. So just to put this into perspective, I mean, Tennessee's doing really well compared to other states on vaccination rollout. And you've already mentioned that. But to put it in perspective, I believe, I was asking her a few questions, and I believe there's 500,000 people over 70, or is it over 75? How many is it?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It was 460,000, I believe. It's not quite 500,000, but and then of that group, only 10% have been vaccinated the first time. So and we only have total number of vaccine doses. So it's going to be a long, I don't know how long, but it's going to be a lengthy time before even that first group is vaccinated. Is that correct?
It is. I mean, obviously not everyone is going to take vaccine. And so that's sort of the wild card in all of this. And in how quickly we move through the phases is the percentage of uptake, because, you know, we're seeing in some parts of the state and in some, for example, some healthcare facilities report that, you know, 85 or 90% of their staff are accepting vaccine. Conversely, we've heard really troubling numbers in other parts of the state and some of our rural counties where, you know, less than 10% of first responders accepted vaccine. So there's a huge amount of variability. And, you know, we never expect, as much as we would love it, we never expect that 100% of people will take vaccine. So, you know, those numbers, the total population numbers are helpful benchmarks, but it's still hard to know how fast we'll move through those populations, because we just don't know how many people within them will actually seek and desire vaccination. So, you know, I think that's where I think signing up for the Find My Phase tool is important, because, you know, counties may move, you know, through those different groups more quickly, depending on that. And just sort of keeping your eyes peeled to the news and updates on our website to find out, you know, when you or your family or others might be eligible to receive vaccine, because it is going to be variable, and we aren't going to wait forever. So, you know, I think we've asked that our counties do a lot of outreach, especially if they feel that they haven't had good uptake in their older populations. You know, they're working with senior centers and AARP and whatever organizations they can find to do outreach to those folks. But at the end of the day, we can't force someone to come in and get vaccinated if they don't want to. And so once they feel that those efforts have been exhausted, then they'll move to the next age strata. And so, you know, I think that's where, you know, we'll just have to see how that progresses over time. Obviously, we want as many people as possible to be vaccinated, but that's still a bit of a wild card in knowing how this will all play out.
Yeah, so we're a ways away from phase 2A then, would you say?
I think so, but again, there's a lot of unpredictability right now in what the pipeline looks like. So, there's been comments by both the outgoing and incoming administrations that they're not going to hold back the second dose of vaccine at the federal level anymore, that they have enough confidence in the manufacturing of Pfizer and Moderna that by the time we need those doses, they'll be available. New doses will be available. So right now, basically, as much vaccine has been allocated to the states is also in freezers at these facilities, ready to be allocated, but is being held back to be that person's second dose. And so that there's discussion that those doses will not be held back anymore. So that could be a big surge in doses. We also know that Johnson & Johnson, the third vaccine to come on the market, has started their phase 3 clinical trial. They submitted their phase 1 and 2 data earlier this week. And so in a matter of potentially a couple of months, we could also be seeing that vaccine come on the market with at least 2 others in the pipeline. So, that's the other aspect to this, is that there are other vaccines besides these 2 that could be available to help increase supply and availability.
Yeah, and then one quickly on phase 2A, I'm getting a lot of questions about who qualifies for that, and I know you are too, but if sometime in the not so distant future, we could get specifically what that includes, and by that I mean which veterinarians, which critical infrastructure does, I know it says food, does it say food manufacturing, or I'm not sure the exact verbiage?
Yes, sir. It says commercial agriculture involved in food production and commodities.
Okay, so does that include fiber as well? Would that include the forestry industry, and specifically which veterinarian group? Would that include mixed animal, equine? It says ag and food, but I don't know what all that entails. So those kind of questions, everybody wants to be first, sure, obviously, but
I understand.
It is based on risk. That's what the whole.
It is. Yeah. Again, it's that risk balance of even within the critical infrastructure pieces, acknowledging that there are some sectors of that they themselves are much higher risk of acquiring COVID. In many of our food production and manufacturing facilities, for example, we've seen many outbreaks and cases of disease versus in some other industries, less so. So it is never meant to be a commentary on importance or value. It's just trying to weigh that risk benefit of the disease burden in that particular group. So I'm happy to get you a more granular list, Commissioner Hatcher, to try to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, when we get
a little more clarity.
Yeah, when we get closer to that phase, it'd be to have more detail, because we're going to get the questions when it comes up. And there's another quick question about one spouse getting it and the other not.
Yeah, so I think what we've learned about COVID is that it seems that only a small proportion of people actually account for the majority of spread. So you might have heard in the lay press these referred to as super spreaders. For whatever reason, some people that either have symptoms or not appear to shed more virus into the air and surrounding environment and account for a lot of spread. That being said, in things like household environments, we know there's a lot of risk. The longer duration that you're in close contact with someone, the greater your risk is going to be. But there are still plenty of instances of people being in the same home, sharing a bed for days while someone was infectious and not knowing it, and their partner not becoming infected. And we still don't really understand exactly why. So, still a lot to learn. I can't reiterate enough, frequent testing if you've had an exposure, or wearing a mask, even at home if you think you might have been exposed to someone with COVID, to protect your family, and all of those other prevention measures. And then it looks like there's one more question about, is Tennessee going to adopt the new vaccine guidelines? Yeah, I think that's probably in reference to Secretary Azar's announcement of opening up to all those over the age of 65. I think we've indicated our focus on vaccinating the oldest in Tennessee. There's not going to be a plan to do that tomorrow because we don't have the vaccine to do it. I think once we know more about the vaccine that's coming as part of that, then we will certainly look to vaccinate just as many people as we can in the appropriate categories as quickly as we can. But the last thing we want to do is with the limited amount of vaccine that we have right now, open it up to that population and have a lot of very angry people because they can't find access to vaccine anywhere, which is what would happen. So just as quickly as we can do that safely with an adequate supply, we will certainly do so.
Okay, we just all have to be patient, which is not, it's a virtue
Me too.
that most of us don't have.
I know, same.
But yeah, if you can get a more granular description of that commercial, agriculture, what that includes, that's of interest to this group for sure.
Sure, happy to do so.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. We'll move on to some good news. Dr. Muhammad, I know you got all kinds of good news today.
Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. And I guess this is going to be somewhat. Let me share screen here.
Well, it was pretty positive last time. I would think it would continue somewhat.
Let's see.
Better than the first presentation or two. Those were kind of dismal.
Yeah, you're right about that. I take it you all could see this just fine.
Yes, got it.
Okay, good. All right, so what I want to do is just give just a quick update. I don't think this is going to take longer than 10 minutes. And I know USDA is reporting now that agricultural exports in November was like the record November over the last, say, I think since 2013. Not sure what that means exactly. It could mean just sort of much higher agricultural exports moving forward. And obviously that's going to have an impact on the state. The good thing is I just sort of keep updating this slide each month as the new data comes out. And the good thing is we're clearly sort of beyond that period when the pandemic had a huge negative impact on Tennessee's agricultural exports. And so here, once again, what we're looking at are agricultural exports, including related products. So that's forestry, distilled spirits and fish, ethanol, for 4 years on a monthly basis. And one of the things that I always highlight is the fact that the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdowns hit at a time when Tennessee agricultural exports are at their peak. And so as you could see in, for example, May 2017, exports were about $238 million that month. And then you could look at sort of the same time period, May and June 2020, which is $100 million lower, right? And so we had a lot to make up moving forward. But one of the things you could see when you look at the purple line, which is 2020 exports, is that as soon as markets begin to open back up, as lockdowns and business closures begin, requirements begin to be relaxed, that trade immediately recovered. And in fact, right now we're on par with trade in 2017, which, as you could see, was the better of the 4 years, at least during the last quarter of the year. So things overall are looking good in terms of at least the recovery. Now, what does that mean in sort of actual numbers? As of November 2020, and how does that compare to year-to-date trade the previous year? It's about the same. We're now only in, say, like a single-digit sort of decline, and one could imagine that December, where we'd be right on par with 2019. Cotton has been on the positive side. Distilled spirits, once again, on the positive side when compared to the previous year. Forest products have been particularly sluggish. And so not only has the trade war had a huge negative impact on the Tennessee forest product sector in regards to exports, but that coronavirus had this added negative impact. And that industry appears to be quite sluggish in recovering from both of those impacts. in one of our larger consumer good categories, which are sort of what the trade data categorizes as other baked goods. That's up a 4.2%. And so clearly we're not seeing the huge negative or the huge declines or negative comparisons that we've seen sort of the when I first started giving this talk a couple of months ago. So overall, things are getting better. Now, here's the thing I do want to point out, that there is some reason to be even more positive, and here's why. So right now, we're about on par with 2019 in terms of year-to-date trade, but that's based on this last quarter being comparable to previous years. So one could imagine if we go forward at this same rate, we could possibly then regain the losses that we suffered during the trade war, right? So in 2018, we exported $2.4 billion, but as a result of the trade war, that decreased to about $2 billion, which is a loss of obviously $400 million. And if you think of this multiplier that USDA likes to use, where for every dollar in exports, there's $1.3 in additional economic activity, one could say we lost nearly $1 billion in economic activity due to the trade war. So it looks like we could possibly recover that in 2021 if exports remain on this same pace. Now, something that I have never focused on, but I'm actually working on a paper now that could be positive for 2021, and that's distilled spirits exports for the state. We don't really talk a lot about it. Obviously, we're not referring to a primary agricultural product, but it's important clearly to state exports. And this particular sector suffered as a result of the trade war, but not due to retaliatory tariffs from China, but retaliatory tariffs from Europe in response to the steel and aluminum tariffs that the President Trump imposed on all countries, right? And so you could see this huge decline from 2018 to 2019, right? Nearly $700 million down to about $450 million. Now, year to date, so my point is, year to date, we fully exceed 2019. But my hope would be that as we move forward, and I know that the new appointment, the new trade ambassador, the new head of USTR, is really talking more about sort of taking a multilateral approach to trade. So my hope is that in 2021, we get these issues resolved with the EU and get distilled spirits exports back up to their previous levels, if not exceeding it. And Brexit offers some relief in that regard, because now we could conclude the trade deal with the United Kingdom, now that they straighten out their issues with the EU. And you could see the United Kingdom is a big market for Tennessee distilled spirit exports. And then obviously then the Biden administration would need to work out issues of the retaliatory tariffs with Europe overall. And then we could possibly get back to pre-trade war levels. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about, or just so give you an update on issues with China, because a lot of the price increases in the row crop categories that Aaron reported are a function of these ramped up purchases that the Chinese have done to satisfy the phase one trade agreement. And if you just look at these three areas where the Chinese have committed to dedicated purchases of U.S. agricultural exports, that agriculture, even though they've fallen short in terms of all three of these categories, agriculture is where they've come closest to reaching the target, right? And so one of the things that's taken place are these ramped up purchases by the Chinese government through state-owned enterprises of U.S. agricultural commodities. And then also what's taken place is we've seen some sluggishness in major competitive markets like in South America, particularly as it relates to cotton and soybeans. All right, so as a result of that, China has regained a top spot as the leading destination market for U.S. agricultural exports. And this is obviously year to date, but looking at the numbers, I think December may be even stronger. And so, and a lot of that has to do with these dedicated purchases as a result of the phase one trade deal. And that's important to this state because one, we export a lot of cotton to China. And obviously, even though we don't get credit for the soybeans that gets exported, soybeans are particularly important to the overall agricultural economy. Now, what's unfortunate, however, is that forest products are not considered agriculture in the phase one trade deal. And so, other than sort of satisfying manufacturing commitments, the purchases of Tennessee forest products by China in no way counts toward them achieving the trade deal goal. And so that's one of the reasons why we've seen this sluggishness, at least I believe, in the forestry sector sort of recuperate and lost exports from years past. All right, so here, take for example, the numbers for cotton, all right? So if you could apportion out what China committed to by commodity based on past trade, that would be about, say, $1.6 billion in cotton. And you could see, and that's far larger than what China has done in the years past. So these are cumulative exports of cotton to China, where in 2019, it was $700 million. All right, you could see how much more now. And all of this is actually based on sort of accumulations by the state in terms of their reserves and purchases by state-owned enterprises. So a lot of this is through, at least according to some sources, 3/4 of this are sort of non-market purchases by the Chinese government. But that alone has been driving up prices, this sort of excess demand, even if it's not necessarily, and I shouldn't say that alone, but that is a component of why prices have increased. This excess demand that's a function of these state-owned enterprises purchasing U.S. commodities. Something that looks particularly good moving forward, and this is something that Aaron and we're working on or have a paper in review, and that is these accumulated exports and outstanding sales moving forward for soybeans. And you could see in the 2020-2021 marketing year how much more, whether it be exports to China or just exports to the rest of the world, or what the USDA is categorizing as own destinations. That's when producers, exporters don't report the destination market. But you could see how much larger soybean exports are expected to be. And that's important, right? Because we tend to export as a country a little over half of soybean production, and a big part of that goes to China. And so therefore, things look good for soybean exports moving forward. So you could imagine some pressure behind keeping prices relatively high. So lastly, I'll just simply close with an announcement about the Mid-South Agricultural Trade Conference, which is virtual this year. This is our second annual conference, sponsored by the University of Tennessee, UT Extension, UT Martin, as well as the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. You all will get a copy of this presentation. So you see the link at the top for registration. So that's going to be March 5th, 2021, all virtual. We have speakers coming from USDA as well as from industry speaking on international trade issues affecting the state and region. So thank you. I'll stop sharing, and then I look forward to any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. That was positive. I think it was. And so you're optimistic about 2021, are you not?
I am, for two reasons. I don't see there's no talk about not having China honor the phase one trade deal. Thing. The second thing is, now that Europe and the UK have at least partially worked out the exit of the United Kingdom, we could get back on the trade deal with the United Kingdom. And there is some positive aspects there for forestry as well as distilled spirits. And then one thing now that the coronavirus pandemic, we seem to have managed it a lot better than before. I could imagine, particularly for the forestry sector, further expansion of exports to markets other than China. And that's one of the things we're working on. I mean, TDA in both UT is sort of marketing Tennessee forest product exports to other countries. And so, yeah, no, I'm as far as I can tell, things are looking pretty good, both in terms of outstanding commitment as well as just sort of looking at past trends.
All righty. Thank you very much. I'm not sure who's on for Farm Bureau, but you're up next. Anybody on for Farm Bureau? May not be. That's okay. We'll go to, I saw Mike Mayfield on. Are you on, Mike? Yeah, there you go.
Yes, sir. I'm on, Commissioner. Good morning. Thank you for continuing to host this event. I'll give you some quick updates. I know we're beginning to close in time. We do have several signups that are still running on several programs that are out there in three very different areas. First and foremost is our Conservation Reserve long-term contract program for those wanting to retire land and primarily put it back into erosion protecting and wildlife cover. Next will be our annual ARC PLC program. That's our typical sign up. That's going to run between now and March. We got a lot of people to get through the office in the next few weeks in that program. So it's one that really protects when prices are low. I'm glad to see all the positive notes about the uptick in prices, which will be very positive in the fact that we'd much rather producers be able to get those price amounts through the market rather than coming through these particular programs. On top of that, we have a new piece, what's called the Quality Loss Adjustment Program that just went into effect last week. Will run through March the 5th. So we will be reaching out to partners to help us distribute information on this program because we do have a short window to enroll. This has to do with quality losses that occurred to crops in 18 and 19. So we will be sending that information out there. It's kind of a companion program to the WHIP Plus program. We've already had about 15 million issued in that program. So we expect a considerable amount of money to be available for those that had quality losses under this new program. Aaron did mention a little bit earlier, there is waiting in the wings, another CFAP type program. We don't know exactly what all that's going to entail at this point. I would just tell you to stay tuned. It will probably be coming sooner than later, but we will find out more of that over the next few days, and I'll try to share that information when we possibly can. I do want to say one thing. I appreciate the reports that Aaron puts together as far as the distribution of funds through the various programs throughout this year. I want to kind of summarize that a little bit for FSA as we wrapped up 2020. In 2020, we slid over the $1 billion mark in just about 1.01 billion issued to agricultural producers across the state in the various programs, whether that's direct payments, loan programs, a combination of our traditional programs and the coronavirus stimulus programs. So that was a monumental task. I can't say again how much it was beneficial for all the partners that worked with us to try to get the word out to the producers. And certainly some of you helped develop advertisement information and materials that allowed us to reach some segments of the producers that we had not been able to reach in the past. And that's very, very much appreciated. I'll have to brag on my team. They did a tremendous job under very challenging circumstances. And they did a great job of accomplishing that task. I do want to mention one additional thing. Tennessee is currently all in the gating period in our operational status for our county offices. That means we're allowed to have 2 persons in office each day, but we are not allowed to have additional visitors in the office. We're working primarily by appointment. We're using all the virtual tools that we used in the signups early in the year to continue to service producers. And we hope to be able to get these programs that we currently have ongoing accomplished in those ways. Certainly the group has been successful in doing that in the past. with that, I'll wrap it up. This could possibly be my last opportunity to meet with this group. So I want to say again, Commissioner, I really appreciate you bringing this group together during the pandemic. I think it's been a tremendous asset to Tennessee agriculture. And I think it's been a guiding principle to get us through this event, and hopefully it will the rest of 2021. With that, I'll take any questions or anything else that might be about FSA.
Well, thank you, Mike. Your service has been extraordinary, and the communication and collaboration and cooperation has been excellent. So it's been all good. So traditionally, does a change in administration change what all positions? Would it be? Well, maybe that's not a good question, but traditionally that's what happens.
Traditionally, administrative change will affect my position, and I'll speak for Jim in RD's position.
Okay. All right. Speaking of Jim, is he on? May not be. I haven't seen him.
Well, thank you for the opportunity,
Okay.
Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mike. So I know I've seen Sheldon on. There you go, Sheldon.
Hey, good morning, Commissioner Hatcher.
Good morning.
Hey, as Mike mentioned, Commissioner, we're still operating in the reopening standard. Basically, all of our service centers are continuing to function in the gating period, which means we're kind of maximizing telework, but we're still going out to the field, but practicing social distancing on that, Commissioner. So right now, we want to make sure that we just keep our employees, our customers, our partners safe, in our USDA service centers. I had the extreme pleasure this morning, Commissioner, with you as far as the virtual shared stewardship agreement signing ceremony. I thought that was great between U.S. Forest Service, Tennessee Department of Agriculture, and also other agencies. Really appreciate the Undersecretary James Hubbard as far as being on there, and also Commissioner Salyers and Bobby Wilson with Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. I mean, that shows the great partnership. I look forward to collaborating with the agencies to accomplish, the mutual conservation goals and future interests, and taking care of the natural resources here in Tennessee. So that was impressive, and excited about that and being a part of that. Over the past few months, as far as our conservation programs, Commissioner, we processed a little over 2,500 payments for about $19 million. We currently have a sign up with our agriculture conservation easement program. The deadline for that is Monday, February 8th. Also, I would share that our state conservation engineer, Robert Anderson, retired on December 31st. And so Alton Miller, he kind of handled our emergency watershed protection program, will serve as the acting state conservationist effective on January 3rd. We're currently working on our environmental quality incentive program, allocation and budget for this year's program. We are hoping to have obligations completed by June 20 of this year. We're currently in the process of making funding decisions on our conservation stewardship program renewal applications. We're potentially going to look at requesting additional funding to look at funding all of our applications in Tennessee. We're currently working through our direct hire process and those positions have been posted on USA Jobs. We submitted 17 positions for direct hire authority, which includes soil conservationists, technicians, and also engineering technicians. So hopefully we can build some capacity there with direct hire. And then also we have released a final rule on our regional conservation partnership program. That rule updates the partner-driven as directed in the 2018 Farm Bill, which integrates feedback from agricultural producers. And so that the Regional Conservation Partnership Program help protects, working agricultural lands and ensure resilience to climate change by increasing sustainable use of soil, water, wildlife, and also related natural resources. So that concludes my report, Commissioner, and appreciate being a part of these webinars.
Thanks, Sheldon. That's a good report. I believe I saw Dr. Sinsman on. Are you on, Scott? Yes.
Yes, sir. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity again. Got a couple things I think we can report. I think very much like Sheldon mentioned and Mike that our offices in the county are are basically by appointment. We're really trying to keep and limit the number of interactions we have there, or just be able to control that. And so that's where I think our alternative phase continues to be effective for us, and we're employing that almost throughout the entire state. In this case, every now and then we have a few exceptions, but for the most part, that's where we are. We had to make a decision really right before Christmas. Commissioner, you and I were on some contacts there related to the Junior Swine Show. That was really the first thing we really felt like over here that we really couldn't do in a safe manner based on the size of the potential event, the timing of cases, and all the things that were going on with our coronavirus numbers. So we pulled back from that live event to go virtual, and Aaron Fisher did a great job of putting that together. A lot of that starts over the weekend on a virtual event. So we're still having something, but it wasn't exactly like we had planned to do. But we really felt like that was the best thing for us to handle there at that point. I think a lot of the things we're looking at right now in the future for 4-H events, we're really looking at camps to try and figure out how to have those. We also are planning for some backup plans as well. That's one of those situations where we're really hoping to figure out how to do it. And we're working through multiple different options there so that we can have something. Would say that the CARES funding that I think Keith and you all provided has been really well received. Obviously, a lot of that material for STEM in a Box for 4-H has been purchased and distributed. Our 4-H camps look like a Best Buy there for a while. There are just boxes everywhere with materials. And so I want to thank you all again for all the things that really allowed us to continue to do in a really tough time. With that, I think I'll stop and turn it back over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Dr. Sinsman, and thank you too for your service. And it's been also excellent working with you, and very enjoyable for me. And it's just a true volunteer spirit, and I appreciate it a lot. So will we be able to see you again at the next meetings, or you don't?
I think maybe one more, probably, and then after that, I think I turn it over.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
Well, thank you, sir.
I failed to mention, and this is a big thing. So the Tennessee legislators are back in session. The department has been working through the budget process, and we should know a little bit more about the governor's proposed budget by the first week of February or so. And that's a big deal with everything that's been going on. You know, we went through a couple budget reduction plans. As it turns out, it does look like the tax revenue for the state of Tennessee is in fact not decreased. I think some of the figures yesterday, and in fact, that I think maybe up 3.5% overall, which is kind of amazing in itself. So we've seen a lot of industries that have really taken it on the chin, the hospitality industries, and we've seen other industries that have just skyrocketed, like internet sales and that kind of thing. So the net result has not been as bad tax revenue wise as we thought. So I'm not sure what the budget's going to look like, but I think we're trying to leverage all we can for agriculture and forestry and for our portion of that. So is there anybody else that would like to make some comments or give an update before we close out here? Tina has already posted the next meeting, February 16th or so. So you should have that invite. And also, Tina, if you'll send out, like you always do, any presentations so that they can look at those. Until next time, y'all keep doing what you're doing. And the sun is shining today. So I'd encourage you to listen to some of those old songs. And keep you in good spirits. Y'all take care.